We have here probably something that a lot of people like. Now, we have here some nice Italian sausage. Now, I'll make you just kind of close your eyes and think. How would you like to be at a nice picnic now, huh? And can you almost kind of smell some of the cooking going on, right? And all that nice food that we like. Potato salad and hot dogs and all those things, right? Well, it's interesting. One thing about all those nice foods that we like in the summertime, just like our Gianelli here, it stays in our belly. When they say Gianelli in your belly, they mean business. Because that's what happens to a lot of the food. It stays with us in all kinds of parts of our bodies, doesn't it, huh? Well, Jesus uses food and eating to teach a very important spiritual message in our gospel tonight. He's saying that just like the food that we eat becomes a part of us, whether we want that or not, the spiritual food that he gives will also make us a part of him. And that's kind of what we want to talk about just for a very few minutes tonight. There's an important difference. But first, let's just start by looking at what Jesus said. He said, "Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me, and I in him." Now, right away, notice that people are starting to object right away, right? How can this man give us his body and blood to eat? His body to eat and his blood to drink. But you notice Jesus doesn't back down or change the message, does he? Huh? But he uses that objection to answer a very important question. And the question is this: how is Jesus going to remain with his followers after he leaves this world? After he leaves this world, how is he going to be with us? And the answer is quite simply, he will be with all his followers the same way he's with us as we gather here tonight. This is how he's going to be with us when we gather together to eat the bread and drink the blood of Christ. Now, that was an important question, because the Gospel of John that we just heard from was kind of the last gospel to be written, and it was probably written maybe 100 years after Jesus left this world. And people were starting to gather. The Christians, like ourselves, were starting to gather each week, much like we are. And they really had to be reminded of just how much Christ was right there with them when they gathered. Now, remember the difference between our earthly food here and the special spiritual kind of food that Jesus gives us. Because with our food, just as he kept saying, the food that we eat remains with us. But when we eat the body and blood of Christ, we are made one with Christ. We are in Christ. Now, what he's saying is, I am in you, you are in me. Now, along with that, if we are in Christ, we also share in what He came on this earth to do. We share in His message, and we share in His mission. And that may not make us at times so very comfortable. Because remember, who did Jesus seem to spend His time with? The outcasts of society. The people that were looked down upon. But unless we make this our concern too, we're not truly one with Christ. Now, this whole idea that we're talking about tonight, this whole idea of Christ in us and we in Christ, that's always been a challenge to understand. Always been a challenge to really get a hold of. And maybe an example will help. Maybe an example of what it means to have Christ in us. Now, Catherine is an inmate over at the Justice Center, about a block away. And she faces some very serious charges. Well, if that isn't enough, while she's been at the Justice Center, she has had a recurrence of a very serious illness. So the other day when I asked her, now, how do you deal with all this? She said it's by receiving communion at Mass that I have the courage to face this. I have the courage by receiving communion. With Christ in me, somehow I know I can make it. I know I can make it. She said, the hardest part is forgiving myself. But I know that if Christ is in me, I am forgiven and I'm not abandoned. Catherine is an example of what it means to have that Christ in us. And also, Catherine does the very best she can to help the other inmates around her, particularly the women who are just coming into the jail. She said, the first few days are the hardest, I know that. So I try and help, I try and comfort them. But when she does that, she's also sharing in the mission of Christ, isn't she? And that's what it means to truly be a part of Christ. And we become part of what He came to do. So, tonight now, as we prepare to share in this body and blood of Christ, let's just stop for a minute. Let's just stop and ask ourselves a question. Let's ask ourselves a question. Everybody ready? What do I face in my life that looks most difficult? What do I face in my life that looks most difficult right now? Or maybe even for some of us, what looks impossible? So let's just stop. We'll take a little less than a minute. Each one of us come up with the answer. Everybody have what's impossible? Most difficult, huh? I know I do. Okay. Now, let's very simply remember those words of Christ. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me, and I in him. It means that Christ is there in us. It means that Christ is truly with us. Now, if we can really remember that, and make it a part of ourselves that Christ is with us, we can face what's most difficult in our lives and what may even seem impossible.